In this video, I want to talk about Jordan Peterson's advice to creative people. And so I'm going to play a clip from Jordan, and then I'm going to talk about my thoughts on what Jordan has said. But I don't want this just to be about Jordan Peterson, really. I want this video to be greater than that. I'm going to introduce some Nietzschean ideas, some Jungian ideas, and I really want to focus in on the problem and the struggle specifically of the person who has the creative temperament and their kind of struggles and problems they encounter throughout their life as they're trying to go through the creative process, trying to produce something while still trying to encounter and live the everyday life like everyone else is. And so that's really the problem that I want to address and focus in on. So I'm going to use this clip from Jordan Peterson just as a reference. No copyright intended. This was an interview done by Rob Moore, and he did the interview with Jordan Peterson on his channel. And so I'm going to run the clip, and we're going to talk about it. So here we go.
And the other thing that happens with the artistic and maybe the entrepreneurial types too is that they end up with contempt for the business end of the process, and that's a real mistake. I mean, one of the things that I tell people who are artistically oriented, let's say, so they're in the entrepreneurial category, is look, it's virtually impossible for you to monetize your product. That's the first thing you have to understand. So maybe you'll get lucky and you'll figure out a strategy. But if you add contempt for the sales and marketing process to that impossibility, you can be bloody well sure that all you're going to do is starve. So you better drop your contempt for the sales and marketing end of this if you want to sustain yourself through your life. And that's going to be a prerequisite for your creative endeavor.
Yeah.
And art schools and establishments like that do an absolutely dreadful job of...
Well, they don't teach it.
Not
I was an
at all.
artist. I was an artist. I went through art school.
Yeah.
They don't teach it.
No.
Never once.
No, I know. And and I mean...
How are you going to commercialize your venture? How are you going to pay for your mortgage? What, just...
How are you going to buy food?
Yeah, with just a paintbrush and a canvas.
Oh, Jesus. And artists are in particularly dire position because as a visual artist, for example, you're not only competing with all the visual artists that now exist, and there's plenty of them, but you're also competing with all the dead artists who were who already have an established reputation and a body of work that's being still being exchanged in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to add contempt for the sales and marketing process to that. And you also probably have to understand that if you want to be an artist, that you're also going to have to have another job.
Yeah.
Because it's just, unless you want to bang your head against the wall until it's bleeding. It's so hard. And I mean, I've known some people who are outstanding artists, and I've known very, very few. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who was able to make a living from the outset of their career as a non-commercial visual artist. Brutally difficult.
Yeah.
So, and adding contempt to that is not helpful. You should be very thankful that sales and marketing people exist. Even I know there's that, what would you call it, the mercantilist commercial element to it that is sort of, in some sense, you can consider it distasteful from the perspective of higher aesthetics, but don't confuse your ignorance of something important, sales and marketing, with your moral purity. That's a big mistake. It's a big ethical mistake, and you will pay for that.
Yeah.
So,
Fixed.
And we'd take all sorts of risks that would be catastrophic. So yeah, you think, well, you need people who say no. God, that's painful. You need people who get in the way. You need people who are orderly. And for people who are entrepreneurial and expansive in their temperaments, that's all like, oh my God, those are prison walls. But no, they're not. They're necessary structure and protection. And then again, don't be contemptuous of your damn sales and marketing people, because you're bloody lucky that you've got them. And they're rare people. And that's also true of that set of skills that's a set of skills you need to develop if you're a creative person and an artist. Don't be contemptuous of that with your false romanticism.
Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't have to sell it. It's a great product in and of itself, and all I'm doing is selling out.
Yeah.
It's like most people don't sell out because they never have the damn opportunity. And so if you can manage the sales, and then you think, well, I'm going to maintain my artistic purity despite the fact that you could manage the sales, well, then you're making an ethical decision. But if you're not selling out because no one wants what you're doing, that's no moral victory. An idea, let's say you're creative. You have a whole bunch of ideas. It's like, well, which ideas should you pursue? Well, one constraint you can use is something like, if the idea that I'm interested in has absolutely no commercial viability, then maybe I should put it lower in the priority list. Because you need some mechanism to put things lower in the priority list. One of our rules for product development was that, well, we had to like the idea. It had to be compelling. We wanted it not to do harm to people. We wanted it to help people. We wanted it to be scalable. But then we also decided very early on that we weren't going to make things that wouldn't generate a profit, because it was a constraint. It's like, well, if we can't do all those other things and make a profit, it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So and that's helpful if you have too many ideas.
So guys, there you go. That's 3 clips from the entire interview that Jordan has been talking about creative people and business people and sales people, and kind of how there is a general attitude in creative people that they have contempt for the business world and contempt for the business process end of their creativity. Now, I thought I'd just, talk a little bit about my experience, because I actually haven't made a video for a little bit because I've been working more. I don't know, I've never really said this before, I don't think, but I actually work in sales. So that is my everyday job, and I create these videos for you guys and for myself. I love to learn continuously. I'm on a creative project right now where I basically am just trying to learn as much as I can about Carl Jung and create videos for you guys. And at the same time as I'm reading, I'm also writing. So that's why I see it as my creative project, because I am taking in information, I'm thinking up new thoughts and extending the thoughts that I'm reading, and I'm trying to essentially write a book, really, and also create a YouTube channel. So there's my 2 creative outlets. And but all of that is done on the sidelines of me working in sales. And also, you guys might not know, but I actually have a master's degree in advertising. And I've spent, I'd say, hundreds of hours on learning about marketing outside of my degree. In fact, I really think that there's something wrong with the university. They don't really teach you core skills. I learned all my skills outside of university, and that's another topic for another video. But the point of the story is that I am what Jordan has really talked about here. I am a sales and marketing person. I actually, just to be upfront and truthful with you, it was too hard for me to actually break into a proper marketing role. So I had to settle for a sales role, which is my experience that I have. And, I'm pretty good at it. I'm good at communicating with people, interacting with them, and selling the key points of the product or service I'm trying to sell. And so I'm good at it. And, that's fine. But in a sense, I've failed to break into marketing because I find that in my city, there's not really that many jobs that will entry-level jobs into the profession. And so most jobs ask for 2 to 3 years experience. There's very few entry-level jobs. I've had a few interviews, but unfortunately I wasn't good enough, so I failed in that regard. That's, I can keep trying, but it's been a little bit now. So I guess I'm just going to have to, just accept kind of where I'm at. But the point of what I'm saying is that I also, in my life, identify as a creative person. I've made an album when I was 18. It was a rap album. I've moved away from that type of creative expression. As I said, right now I'm writing a book. I'm trying to write. See, I don't completely know what the book is going to become in its final form, But what it is right now, the idea is that I wanted to take a Jungian perspective and apply it to our current economic life and the way our business structures are structured, how work life is instantiated in our culture. And I wanted to analyze our system from a Jungian perspective and really analyze, I wanted to call the book The Psychology of Money, and go back through history and look at how money, not just physically or culturally, but how money as an idea evolved and what it kind of means and its relationship to archetypal themes and stuff like that. So that's kind of the kind of book I want to write. I would say at this point, I am not equipped to write that book completely because I need to learn a lot to do that. But the reason I'm telling you all this is to just show you kind of the day in the life of someone who has creative ideas, who has the creative temperament, because Jordan says, basically, essentially, go to my self-authoring program, go to understandmyself.com, and if you understand your temperament, you can then build your life based on your temperament. And I understand and take the advice of Jordan, as far as he says that there is, certain temperaments. And so I am high on openness. I'm pretty low in conscientiousness, even though I am trying my best to work hard and do the best I can. And I am, pretty low on agreeableness. I'm very high in extroversion, very high in openness, as I said. Fairly low in neuroticism, so I can handle when things don't work out. I've done many creative endeavors and a lot of things have not worked out for me. I have a failed pest control business, lots of failures in my life, cycled through many different jobs in my life. And so, I understand the creative struggle, what it's like to be a creative person. And so I want to use myself as a test case to kind of show you guys. So I know that I am kind of like a failed creative person, right? But that doesn't mean I'm not going to keep trying, okay? Because I can't. It's in me to continuously try to push the boundaries, to try to create something. I have this creative impulse that I just can't stamp out, that won't go away. And so I struggle a lot in the workforce to see my place in that environment, because when I'm thinking, my natural thought patterns are so different to the structure that I'm meant to operate in that it feels very unnatural to me to be there. But I'm still effective, as I said. That's why I'm telling you about my personal life. So I can see all the criticisms that people are going to give me. You just got to get on with it. You just got to do it. I am doing it. I am getting on with it. I do work in sales and marketing. I've studied it. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I'm telling you, as a creative person who works in sales and has a marketing degree, a master's in advertising, I still am frustrated as fuck. Okay? I am very frustrated in my life. I fucking have so much contempt for almost everything around me. But at the same time, I want you to know, I also have a lot of appreciation. Okay? So I'm not one-sided. I'm a complex individual, and I have a lot of appreciation for the structure that exists at the moment. I like business. I like learning about it. I love marketing. I love learning about how to influence and persuade people. I love the sales process even sometimes. But then there's another part of me that pulls back and criticizes all of that and says, yeah, but this is fucked up, because there's just, all I'm doing at work is I'm submitting my mind, my will, and my gifts and talents to someone else for them to profit off me, to gain more profit off my own skills than myself. And I am taking on their value system, their value structure, and pretending to like and believe in a product or service and selling it to someone else. That's exactly what it is. And so if you take Jordan Peterson's other advice of telling the truth, it's like, to a certain extent, on one half of my personality, I can tell the truth because I do like business, marketing, and all that. But on the number 2 of my personality, I don't like, I criticize it all and don't care about any of it and think it's bullshit. It's slavery in my mind, you know. And the thing is so Jung had this idea of a number 1 personality and a number 2 personality. So the number 1 personality is the one that the world sees, that you can integrate into society properly. The number 2 personality is that deep, creative side of your personality that's deeply connected to the unconscious and the archetypal realities, that's trying to create all this crazy shit. Like Nietzsche, you know, creating all this crazy, you know, all these books that he's written, Zarathustra and all that. You know, so Jung said that he always had to hint at people about things. In other words, he was so conscious that his number 1 personality could interact with people, have a family, have a job, pay the bills, blah, blah, blah. But he had to hint at the number 2 personality that there was a greater existence, a greater reality of things going on. And so what I'm trying to say is that as a creative person who is formally functioning in the world, I'm still frustrated as hell, because to create something is a big fucking burden and no one understands what the fuck, you know, you're on about, because in a sense you're talking and thinking about things that don't exist yet, or aren't popular yet or understood by the mainstream, and you're focusing on things that are like so far out of the realm of understanding for the everyday man that if you were to tell people about it, you'd look really strange in their eyes, okay? And so as I look at my own creative process, I see it as distinctly different to going to work and being involved in business and sales, because it can't be the same thing, because the creative part of my personality despises that thing. It points out flaws in making everything beholden and submitting its intrinsic value to the value of the marketplace and the herd. You know, because as a creative individual, you are creating something of unique intrinsic value that might not necessarily have value in the marketplace. Now, so I agree with Jordan on all his advice for creative people, because if we don't fucking learn how to do sales, learn how to do marketing, if we don't make a schedule, surround ourselves with more conservative people to hem ourselves in, if we don't fucking, you know, make a priority list and try to make money on our creativity, we're going to end up fucked up and we're not going to even be able to get our creativity out to the world. I get that. But, so I agree with Jordan 110%. But at the same time, I'll add something else to that. Not everything is commercially viable, even if that thing is still intrinsically and inherently valuable. So think about spirituality. You can't really monetize spirituality. And you're going to argue with that and say, yeah, but what about superhero movies? That's spirituality. Yeah, whatever. You can stretch it and, you know, inherently anything can be spirituality. But we're talking about the more pure form, like the church. You go to church, it shouldn't be a commercialized building, a commercialized act like some churches are today, right? And you would agree with that. You would agree with that, right? It's meant to be about the spiritual. There's nothing wrong with money. It's just that some things are meant to be pure, you know, and Jordan said it good, you know, it's no moral, you know, it's not a moral thing. If no one even wants your damn creative product, it's not moral to then act like, have the attitude of like, oh, well, I don't want to sell out. I'm not talking about that. That's a bullshit attitude. You know, you're weak, you know, and that's the thing. Maybe I'm too weak. Maybe I am too weak to create something great, and that's why I'm frustrated. But that's fine. But I don't have the attitude that I don't want to sell out. I want to fucking sell my books if I can write it. The thing is that the world is against creative individuals by default, it's not a conspiracy. It's just like, to be creative is to commit the Promethean sin, which is that you are going against the order of the gods, the current structure that exists, and you are trying to do something different and new. And we know it's dangerous, but we know it's also vital. But the thing is that it's almost fucking impossible to live as a creative person. It is so frustrating to be subjugated to someone else's mind all the time and still on the side be able to create something. I work all the time, I support myself, and then I try to create these videos. And the thing is I might not ever be able to get money off my creative work. I might not ever be able to sell enough books. I might not ever be able to have a large enough YouTube channel. I might not ever be able to think up of an entrepreneurial idea that actually is viable and works. And that's life. But what I'm trying to say is that I know there's heaps of people out there who are like me, who are fucked up. And we can try to implement Jordan Peterson's advice as much as we can. Make a schedule, surround yourself with people with different temperaments and strengths. Try to value things in a hierarchy that are actually going to be economically viable. But at the same time, and don't be contemptuous of the sales process and marketing, but at the same time, even after doing all that, I'm telling you, it's still fucked up. It's still fucked. You're still probably not even going to make it, but the thing is that we can't help it because the conservative has it so much easier. The world is made for the conservative. And when I say this, I mean temperamentally. The person who's temperamentally conservative, you can vote whoever you want. That's different. I'm not talking about that, even though there is a relationship there. The thing is that as a creative person, it's very hard to find a niche, especially if you are very, very differentiated. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to go through some passages that Jung talked about in his seminars from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and I'm going to also find a few quotes and talk a little bit about Nietzsche's ideas, okay? And maybe this will help us flesh out the struggle that the creative person is going through. And because that's really what I wanted this channel originally to be about. But then I realized there's not that many people who are actually creative, and I can't really give advice because I'm fucked up myself. So I just thought I would just, whatever I'm learning at the time, I would just mirror that back to you guys and go like, I'm not an expert, I haven't made it, but this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I can see, and this is what's happening, and maybe out of this creative mess of a person, you'll be able to get some value, and we'll be able to kind of understand the problems in the world a little bit better. Okay, so before I go into that, I just want to say, I'm not the type of person that pretends to put forth that I understand everything. Okay, so I see a lot of people in comment sections all the time asserting and saying things as if they understand everything that could have ever existed, and they've come to a conclusion and a judgment, and they're so firm on that judgment. I'm not firm on anything. Okay, so if I criticize the way the workplace is, or if I criticize capitalism or something like that, it's not like my final understanding on it. It's just my experience and an indication that there is something wrong with the way our current system is structured. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I have a solution to it. That doesn't mean that that doesn't also mean that it's wrong, because maybe that's just how life should be. Maybe it should be a little bit fucked up, and that's the thing. I don't know enough about capitalism, about Marxism even, I don't know enough to criticize the world in a way which I am certain that I am right. I only criticize it with a temporal expression of, how this constrains me as a creative person in my identity. So I'm only talking about things in that lens. So don't fucking think, I don't want to see anyone in the comment section talking about, get a job or all this stuff. It's like, I am already working. I already understand all that. I don't care about that. I'm only talking and specifically focusing in on the creative person's struggle in their life. That's what I want to focus on. Not because I'm obsessed with it. Well, maybe I am. Maybe I'm fucking obsessed with it. Who cares? Let's just run with that. I'm fucking obsessed with this problem because it is a part of my life, and I feel like there's not really a voice out there to help people like me, because I can't even go to a psychologist and talk to them about this shit. No one's gonna fucking help me with this shit. I had a dream that I was talking to Jordan Peterson about this problem. I wanted to talk to him about this problem, and we talked for ages about other things, but we didn't really get around to this. And I thought, we didn't get around to this. And I think that's because it can't be solved outside of me. There is no one to help me. I can only help myself in this situation. And, that's why I want to go through these things that Nietzsche and Jung talk about, because I feel that they will help the creative person. Because the more you understand the personality of the creative person, the more you can understand how they're meant to structure and build their life. And that's essentially what Jordan Peterson talks about. Understand your temperament, and then you'll understand how to live your life, what environment you can place yourself in. But as we go through this Jungian stuff, you'll realize that the creative person is kind of destined for a fucked up life. And please don't get offended of me swearing and saying stuff like that. Look, the thing is, I'm trying to be as most authentic with you as I can. Of course, I'm a little bit reserved, I'm on camera, but I'm still trying to express myself as much as I can. And I want you to know that it's not because, I'm trying to be rude or anything like that. I just really, if I can't express myself in this way, I'm not going to be able to convey the message I really want to convey to you guys. So let's just get into the next half of this. Now, Nietzsche has this well-known phrase that he borrows from the Greek poet Pindar. And the phrase is, become who you are. So it's not be who you are, which is kind of like, rings of, a static nature, be who you are. It's not like that. It's become who you are. And so it's he's pointing to a creative, life that is in the pursuit of becoming, but it's becoming its own nature. So it's this idea of freedom, but freedom within constraints. So, we don't have the ultimate free will that is just, free to create at any point in time. Our will, if there is such a thing, is constrained within constraints. And so become who you are is to say, become the creative person along a fixed dimension of who you are set up to become. And so understanding, for example, that you are creative is understanding that you have a certain fate, you have a certain structure of being that you are to live out, and that structure is the prerequisite, the preordained canvas, the rules to which you are able to express your freedom and your creative capacity through. So there is this Japanese artwork, I can't even remember what it's called, but they only allow you to do one brush stroke, and that's it. That's the constraining factor of that medium of art. an artistic expression, is you're only allowed to stroke once across the page. So that stroke, whatever it ends up being, has to be your freedom and creative expression in that one limitation of constrained medium. And so that's the way we see life. Is what I was talking about before, is resentment for the way the full-time work life is structured. So having to go to work, subjugate your mind, your will, your energy to someone else. Of course, you get paid for it, but you are constrained with your time. You can only use that money on the weekend or after work. You don't have that much energy, especially if you want to spend time with friends and family. If you throw and you want to look after yourself, be healthy, eat healthy. If you throw a creative project in there, you've got no time at all, except you're just working and creating. You know, there's always an imbalance when you've got creativity to deal with within your structure. So if creativity is a part of your personality, you've got a very difficult, life trajectory. And so, but the thing is that you have a very rich and deep emotional experience, and that enables you to create something of yourself within the freedom that you have. And so this idea of Nietzsche's also, I think, can help us. So if I said to you, here's a canvas, do whatever you want, you'd probably give me back junk. Okay, so what you really want is to use the rules as a part of the beauty of life. So even though we are constrained within this bullshit structure, and it is bullshit, it is shit, we are forced to create in such a way that will enable us to transcend or to make beauty out of the constraints that we have. So we are constrained by our culture. We are constrained by our history, our life circumstances, where we were brought up, the possibilities and the resources we have around us. We are constrained, but at the same time, that's where the magic is expressed through. So that's the way I've looked at it recently, from taking that Nietzschean idea. And I think that that is actually a very beautiful idea that helps me accept and become less contemptuous of, selling out to the business world, or just, living the normal life, so to speak. And so I found that very helpful. And I want to also say that there is this Nietzschean idea of the organizing idea. And so I'll read this quote here. The organizing idea that is destined to rule keeps growing deep down. It begins to command. Slowly, it leads us back from side roads and wrong roads. It prepares single qualities and fitnesses that will one day prove to be indispensable as means towards a whole, one by one. It trains all subservient capacities before giving any hint of the dominant task, goal, aim, or meaning. And that's from Nietzsche, from Ecce Homo. And so we can see in this idea, kind of the idea of Jung's self, okay? There is this deeper creative self, and it will at times use on the surface various qualities and fitnesses, and it will train them up. So if you're working in sales or you're working in marketing, maybe the creative force that lays deep within your unconscious is training you up to be good at those skills first, so that when the greatest part of your work is released through you, that then you have these sales and marketing skills to promote the creative work that you have. That could be one possibility. Or you could just be a slave and you could just be trapped, and you're never going to get any of your creative work off the ground. Who really knows? But this idea of the organizing idea, the deep idea is a powerful one. That each person has their own idea, And we're not talking about the ideas that are in your mind. We're talking about an essence of an idea, of an imprint of who the person is and who they can become. And so that existential identity is something that I think empowers the creative person to break through and to realize that they can and are in the process of becoming their greatest self through producing the creative work that they're delivering to the world, at the same time as interacting and coming up against and hitting the restraints of the world and the negativity and the backlash of the world and the put downs from the world and the misunderstandings and the not being able to find people who understand or who they can reside in or who they can talk to or not finding a place or somewhere where their work is appreciated and lifted up as something good and cherished that can move forward the culture. Not finding a place that values the creative works that the person is producing. That constraint, that herd that is holding the creative forces back is something that helps shape the creative individual and helps shape the idea of the creative individual in contrast to, because there would not be the creative individual if there was not the herd that individual was trying to break away from or revolutionize. And so I love this idea of the organizing idea, that each person has their own idea, their own particular constitution and destiny, and so Nietzsche has this phrase, what is it? I can't remember how to say it, but it's basically in English, it's the love of fate. And it's willing to live this life over again and again and again. And so it's creating your life and living it in such a way that you wouldn't mind repeating it eternally. And so that gives a lot of weight and value to your existence now, instead of thinking otherworldly and deferring your existence to some other realm and living here with disappointments and contempt. Instead, you are happy of your life and your existence. And so I'd like to also say, though, the contempt for business doesn't have to be so single-minded. You can still, I believe, if you appreciate the process of sales and marketing and what it can do for the promotion of your creative ideas, then you can have an appreciation for it, but you can still have a contempt for it at the same time by having a contempt for the elements of the process that are in contradiction to a pure spirit and a pure nature, but not having contempt for the parts and elements of sales and marketing or the business world or the working life or the normal life that are actually strong and actually beautiful. Because the whole structure that we live on is not all evil or bad. There are good and necessary components. There's a necessary component to the conservative structure. But all I'm trying to express in this video is there's a necessary component to the creative structure too that always holds a little bit of contempt for the structure, because there would not be creativity without contempt. That's what I'm trying to say. But if you differentiate it and you go, well, yes, there wouldn't be creativity without contempt, but at the same time, we don't want that contempt to go too far. In other words, we don't want creativity to go too far and rip up the whole structure. We just want a little bit of contempt just to modify it a little bit. But we want also, an appreciation for the structure so that we don't completely rip it up and we can still function in our everyday life. So we can still work in sales and we can still create on the side. But there's always going to be that tension, and that tension is the burden of the creative person, and that's what you have to take on as the responsibility that Jordan Peterson talks about. The responsibility put onto the creative person is different to the responsibility put onto the conservative person. And the conservative will criticize me and think that I have to take on the responsibility of them. but I don't. I have to take on a little bit of that responsibility as far as I have to align myself with the structure and be stable, but I also have to take on a greater responsibility of the creative life and take on the type of creative spirit that seeks to update and change the existing structure. And that means a lot of torment, a lot of questioning and back and forth. So I have to essentially hold two opposing things together at the same time to survive and complete the updating process. Because no one's going to go to work for me. They say, yeah, sure, partner with someone else with a different temperament. You can do that if you're trying to run a company or something like that. But if you're just trying to live out your life and you're just trying to go to work to survive and then write books on the side or create something or do your art or whatever you want to do, whatever you're gifted at, whatever you're trying to create, you can't just hire someone. I don't have the money to hire someone or have someone around me. Maybe I can make a few friends, but everyone has to kind of still live their own life, you know? And so it can be hard when you're starting out. Maybe in the future, obviously I can do that and that would be healthier for me. But right now, man, I have to hold these two things together. You know, 1 foot in order and 1 foot in chaos. That's what it is. And so there's this good introductory paragraphs that are written with whoever put together the seminars that Jung delivered on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So I'm going to quote that here. And so he's talking about Nietzsche. And so he says here, Schopenhauer, he came to think, talking about Nietzsche, was right in the importance that he attached to will, but wrong in not celebrating it in the form of will to power, by which Nietzsche meant especially the power of creative genius, grounded in the severest discipline. And then he quotes Nietzsche and says, all creators are hard, was one way he put it. So all creators are hard, which means that if you want to be creative, you have to be super disciplined. So what basically Jordan is saying, have a schedule, you know, increase your conscientiousness. If you are open, then you have to increase your conscientiousness. And that's hard because you still want... I've had to neglect hanging out with friends to make videos like this. I've had to neglect hanging out with people and, you know, cleaning my room, so my actual physical room, to create things, to write and read and create, because I have no time. You know, people are already pushed to the limits. And so that is the burden of the creative person, is they have to do everything everyone else has to do, but satisfy their urge to create. Now, you could say, well, just let that creative urge go underground and just suppress it. Who cares about it? Well, I've tried to do that. And what happens is if you do that, it comes up by itself in a destructive manner. Because creativity is two sides to the coin. Creativity is both creative, but it also is destructive. And if you don't differentiate it and make both those sides of creativity conscious, then it actually, a lot of the times, will just, and you suppress it and you don't allow the creative urges to flow, but you are someone temperamentally inclined to creative urges, what happens is it goes underground. And then it comes back up in very destructive forces. And it just comes up in a great criticism for the world, a great contempt for everything. And I think that although a little bit of that is necessary, as I said, it's inherent in the creative process, it can be differentiated and it can be, you know what I mean? It can be made conscious, and then the negative aspect to the destructive element is minimized. And so you still need a destructive element because you have to destroy in order to create at some level. But you can do the destructive nature of creativity in such a way that it's not so negative as to just, if you were to suppress your creative urges and then it just comes up in its own way, in its own will, you know. So it's about aligning yourself with who you are and allowing that creative process to work itself out in such a way where it is integrated properly and effectively and in a sophisticated way into your everyday life and experience so that you can still function as a normal person and still harness the creative abilities that lay dormant and that are shooting up within you. So that's what I've learned from my own life, and that's what I've learned from reading Jung and from listening to Jordan and Nietzsche and combining all their advice and reflecting on my own life and saying, well, hey, this makes sense. We need to integrate our creativity into our life in such a way that it's sustainable. But that can be hard because, so this is the other side of the argument. It can be hard because creativity brings you so far away from real life. It brings you so far away from not real life. I meant the normal life, the number one personality life, the life that most people experience. It brings you so far away from that because you're in another world almost. And so I'm going to go over some of these quotes here, and I think that these are illuminating, but some of them are a bit long, so just bear with me here. This is Nietzsche. This is still the introduction to the seminars on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Worst of all was the loneliness. This is talking about Nietzsche. But as he became more and more the yay-sayer, he saw his loneliness and even his sickness as essential to the creative tasks he had set for himself. As he wrote, late in his conscious life, to the George Brands, to George Brands, my illness has been my greatest boon. It unblocked me. It gave me the courage to be myself. So you can see here that Nietzsche, it's that idea of constraint. That constraint and the illness of his illness and the bad aspects of his life enabled him to just be himself. And so there is something deep in that. So knowing that you are constrained, whatever it may be that is constraining you, let that fact open up so you can just be more of yourself. So, well, I might as well be myself because I am constrained, is the idea there. And maybe this can help me just be who I really am. And so that I find interesting in Nietzsche's psychology. Okay, so here's a quote by Jung about Nietzsche. He says about his way of writing that it simply poured out of him. It was an almost autonomous production. With unfailing certainty, the words presented themselves. And the whole description gives us the impression of the quite extraordinary condition in which he must have been. A condition of possession where he himself particularly no longer existed. It was as if he were possessed by a creative genius that took his brain and produced this work out of absolute necessity and in a most inevitable way. So you see here that the creative life is like a possession. It possesses you and you can't really always, it is controlling you more than you are controlling it. And so, it can be hard to integrate that type of experience into everyday life. Okay, so you get so immersed in your creative project that you are ignoring everything around you. And so to structure your life and get a schedule and put that in there can be difficult, but I still think it can be done to a certain degree. Okay, but I'm just pointing out that it is difficult to do considering how the creative forces work psychologically. Okay, so this is Jung responding to a quote by Nietzsche. So the quote is, "Ye creating ones, there is much uncleanness. That is because ye have had to become mothers." So that's the quote, okay? And then Jung says about that quote, the impurity he alludes to in this very much later passage is the impurity of the mixture of spirit and matter, which is necessary for creation. Without that mixture, no real creation can take place, but it is not concerned with the identification we are concerned with just now. So basically, there it is. In order to create something, there has to be this dirty, muddy process. Ye creating ones, there is much uncleanness, is what Nietzsche said. That is because ye have had to become mothers. So you have to give birth to creation. And so that birth is done fleshly. To actually give birth to something creative, it has to take on this fleshly form, this unclean form. So it is the uncleanness of the mixture between spirit and matter. And, that is a good way to kind of view the creative person, how they live out their life, how they do their creative projects, and how they integrate that creativity into the world, and how they contend with things such as sales and marketing, etc., business world. Because that is also kind of like the uncleanness of doing anything creative in our modern sense, because we are trying to take something essentially spiritual. That's why we see creativity as pure or something like that, and we are trying to manifest that in the world. And the only way we can manifest it with a great influence, if we want to do that, maybe we don't want to do that, maybe we want to turn our creativity inwards or on other things, that's fine. But if we want to develop something in a creative way and want to give it to the world, what's going to enable us to do that is stuff like sales and marketing. So it is building the matter around the spirit. So it's the intermingling of matter and spirit. And so, I might be stretching what Jung and Nietzsche has been talking about here, but in another sense, I don't think I am. I think I'm just applying what they said to our situation here today. And so, I think that's very interesting. The idea of this unclean process of the intermingling between matter and spirit, creativity, and the manifestation of that creativity within the structure that it is trying to transcend. And so I think that's an interesting idea. So here's some quotes by Jung on creativity as being both creative and destructive. You are asking really for a justification for the interpretation of the creative forces as destructive forces. Why dancing, for instance, should be a symbol for both creation and destruction. It is because ritual dancing under primitive circumstances is symbolic. It is always a representation of the creative powers in our unconscious. Therefore, it often means the sexual act or the fertilization of the earth, or it is for the production of a certain effect, whether constructive or destructive. And as a representation of the creative act, dancing necessarily symbolizes both destruction and construction. It is impossible to create without destroying. A certain previous condition must be destroyed in order to produce a new one. The most synthetic creation is inevitably also an act of destruction. The typical Hindu god of the creative forces is Shiva, who dances in the burial grounds. He is the great destroyer because he is creative life, and as such both creative and destructive. You may have seen those Indian dancers who have been in Zurich. They represented the creative act in a most marvelous way. The many arms of the deity express, of course, his extraordinary efficiency. He works not with two hands, but with many. Then if you look at it psychologically, the life of a creative individual contains any amount of destruction, even of self-destruction. So that's the first quote there. And there you can see Jung really fleshing out this idea of what the creative impulse is like. What is its nature? It is destructive and constructive. It's two sides to the coin. And that's why I say you need a little bit of, disregard and animosity for the current structure, because that is inherently a part of the creative process. So that criticism comes inherent in the creative disposition and temperament towards the society it is criticizing. And so it is necessary to have that despondent type of nature towards the current hierarchy and system that's set up. And that's why it's okay to be a little bit frustrated, but you have to be frustrated in a sophisticated way. Otherwise, you're just going to destroy yourself. Okay, and so you use that frustration as a source of inspiration instead of just being completely destructive. But you do need to destroy to a certain extent, because without destruction, you can't bring into new life something new. But you don't only want to destroy without bringing anything new into life. Otherwise, you're just left with nothing. Okay, so that's very interesting there. And there's one more quote here. Often one has the impression that a creative personality grows at the expense of the human being. Creative powers can just as easily turn out to be destructive. From the Collective Works 17, paragraph 244. And here's another quote by Jung, and basically, just to set up the parameters for this quote, he talks about how you shouldn't, if you're creative and you see yourself as a creative person, you shouldn't see yourself as the source of the creativity. And you should differentiate yourself, separate yourself in your mind from the actual creative process itself, from the thing that is creating. You are not the creator. Whatever is the creator is creating whatever it wants to create through you, and you are just the creator's tool. You are a tool to the creative process, because these archetypal creative powers are taking possession of you, and they are using you and your skills to bring something forth into consciousness, into the world. And so those forces, if you identify with them, are going to create an inflation in your personality where you identify with the creative process as being you, which really it's not you, it's just using you as a tool. And so he recommends two things. Either one, you just don't think about it and you just create, and you don't identify with the creative process. You just don't even question it at all. You just kind of are unconscious of what you're doing and you just create. And that's it. You don't think about it. And then you're fine. You don't get an inflation because you're not thinking about you as being the one creating everything. Okay, you're just doing the work, doing the work that's demanded of you. And in that sense, the creative archetypal powers can use you to create without your ego getting too inflated and being destroyed by observing it. But if you can't help it and you do observe that you are a person who is creative, then to not get inflation, you have to differentiate yourself from the process. You have to consciously know at a deep part of you that you are not the creative process. You are not the creator. You are just a conduit of which the creative capacity and powers are manifesting through you. And those ideas have you, you don't have them. They are possessing you. You aren't thinking up of them. They are thinking up of you, and they are manifesting through you to the extent that you can manifest them. And so that is how you're meant to differentiate yourself from the creative process, so that you don't get an inflation and then feel like you're entitled to such and such a life. And so that will make sense now as I read the quote by Jung. If you are simple enough, Nietzsche, of course, could not help looking at the thing, and then he was overwhelmed with resentments, because the creative powers steal your time, sap your strength, and what is the result? A book, perhaps. But where is your personal life? All gone. Therefore, such people feel so terribly cheated, they mind it, and everybody ought to kneel down before them in order to make up for that which has been stolen by God. The creative forces have taken it out of them, and therefore they would like to personify them, to imagine that they are Shiva in order to have the delight of being creative. But if you know you are creative and enjoy being creative, you will be crucified afterwards, because anybody identified with God will be dismembered. An old father of the church, the bishop Dionysius, said that the spiritus fantasticus, man's creative spirit, can penetrate the depths or the heights of the universe like God or like a great demon. But on account of that, he will also have to undergo the divine punishment. That would be the dismemberment of Dionysus, or the crucifixion of Christ. We shall come presently to the same problem in Zarathustra. So you can see here that the identification with being creative creates an inflation and a resentment towards the world. And although I think that resentment is going to exist anyway, because even if you're not conscious of it, you're still going to resent that you are... The fact that the creative powers are doing what they're doing to you are taking you away from family, even if you're not conscious that you are the person who is creating, you're still having to waste time, so to speak, on creating all this stuff. So I think the resentment might exist either way, but at least the resentment towards being identified as the person who is creating this stuff is going to be diminished. And so here's a quote by Jung on the creative person and their neglect for the other parts of their life. Okay, here we go. Well now, this suspended condition has the effect upon the unconscious contents that they can assimilate matter, as it were. They eat the sacrificed body and can then incarnate or impersonate. So one sees that a creative person will easily neglect or forget about his body and devote his entire body to the service of the suspended contents. He will repress everything, practically, as Freud would say. All his troubles and preoccupations vanish as if they did not exist. Only that idea remains, like the French artist Paulzy, who invented the glaze on the surface of pottery. For years he had tried and failed, and he had spent every cent on it. Finally, he thought of a way to produce that enamel. It only needed a certain degree of heat, but then his wood gave out. So he burned his furniture, every stick in his house. And when he had pushed the last leg of the last chair into the stove, the enamel was there. That is an example of the way the creative brain works. The last leg of the last chair must be pushed into the oven before the desired result is reached. But of course, one has sacrificed a lot. One has sacrificed perhaps the happiness of one's life. If one studies the lives of very successful people, I mean their real lives, not the so-called biographies, which are usually lies, one sees that they pay very dearly through loss of human happiness. Now, here's a quote by Jung, and at first he is quoting Nietzsche. Okay, so here's the quote by Nietzsche. Always doth he destroy who hath to be a creator. And now Jung continues, is true. You cannot put something on a table which is already laden. You must first clear those things away in order to put new ones in their place, and to build a house where an old house stands. You must first destroy the old house. We must go a bit deeper and realize that with the instinct of creation is always connected a destructive something. The creation in its own essence is also destructive. You see that quite clearly in the moment when you check the creative impulse. Nothing is more poisonous to the nervous system than a disregarded or checked creative impulse. It even destroys people's organic health. It is dangerous because there is that extraordinary destructive quality in the creative thing. just because it is the deepest instinct, the deeper power in man, a power which is beyond conscious control, and because it is on the other side, the function which creates the greatest value, it is most dangerous to interfere with it. So you see there, Jung says that the creative impulse, it is destructive, but it is also the power which is beyond conscious control. And it is on the other side. So on the other side of being destructive, it is also the function which creates the greatest value. So, because creativity brings into the world the greatest things that we have ever experienced in the whole history of humanity. And so you can't get rid of it, because if you suppress it, you're basically giving up the value of that individual as far as the creative forces that that individual could harness and release to the world. So you can't let go of the creative urge and impulse. Like I said, I think it turns into more destructive if you ignore it. And so it is the function which creates the greatest value for humanity. And so it is a noble task to take head on the responsibility of being creative and having that creative process work through you at the same time as holding on to your life and integrating that creativity into the world. So giving matter to your spiritual creative forces. And so that is what I would call the noble task of the creative person. And so I think I'll leave it there. There's probably more to say, but I've made this video way too long, and I hope that this helps people out there. And I'd like to hear from you, and I want to know what you guys think on this subject, and let me know what other videos you want me to create. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.